and welcome to Season 6, Episode 10 of Conservation Conversations with BirdLife South Africa. I'm your host, Jessica Wilmot, coming to you live from a very chilly Johannesburg. I hope everybody is keeping warm, especially those surrounded by snow. But we're very excited for the webinar tonight to host our colleague, Justin Henry. Please be sure to follow all BirdLife South Africa's social media platforms, and feel free to reach out. We really would like your thoughts on our webinar, and if you even have any guests that you would like us to feature on the webinar, please let us know. Our Facebook is also up and running. Many of you would know that our page got hacked last year, so we decided to establish a new page. So those who are yet to do so, please follow the new page, and I will share the link in the comments soon. We also have over 170 episodes recorded and available on YouTube. So if you have missed any episodes, you are welcome to catch up on our YouTube channel. Please like and subscribe to receive updates as and when we post them. We aim to keep these webinars free as a resource for everybody to learn and enjoy. So if you have the means to do so and you feel that you would like to support the initiative, please donate to our Conservation Conversations Fund. You can do so either through our webpage using the URL on the screen, or you can scan the QR code also on the screen to go to the donation page, or you can send a EFT directly to us using the reference webinars. Thank you to all those that have donated. Then we have a very exciting release. Our colleague Kyle Lloyd and a few other dedicated volunteers have recently published a beautifully illustrated children's book in collaboration with these volunteers to raise awareness about the critically endangered white-winged flufftail and its wetland habitats. These stories aim to inspire young South Africans to explore wetlands and discover the joy of birding. So the two books that we have, the one is called Run Until You Can Fly, where you'll join Saru, the white-winged flufftail, and his friends Oryx the otter and Gus the crane as they navigate unexpected challenges that test their courage and friendship. The second book is Puffy and Zenzi Go Birding, who are two curious poodles, and you'll follow them as they set off on a birding adventure with their human friends. Along the way, they discover wetland wildlife, unique adaptations, and a rare bird very few have ever seen. These books are freely available to download, so just head over to our website to do so. And if you have any trouble doing so, please just reach out and we will help you get access to that really incredible resource. Then we are proud to announce the save the date for our annual bird fair to be hosted on the 6th of September at the Botanical Gardens in Pretoria. It's going to be a really great event where we'll have guided birding walks around the beautiful venue. We'll be hosting fascinating talks by experts in the worlds of conservation and ornithology. And I'll also be able to give everybody an update on the very exciting European roller. And we'll also have a lot more in the program. So more will follow soon, but please make sure that you follow our various social media platforms to ensure that you know what is happening. And please be sure to join us on the day. It's going to be a great event. Tonight's exciting episode, for many of you following the news, you'll see that vultures have been in the news recently. And I think it's a great opportunity to hear how BirdLife South Africa is involved in these vital conservation efforts. So we're excitingly joined by our colleague, Justin Henry, who is our Vulture project manager. And he will be sharing highlights from this year's impactful conservation efforts, from the White-backed Vulture monitoring program to fitting tracking devices on juvenile birds with plans to include adults. This webinar will offer a behind-the-scenes look at efforts to protect one of South Africa's most threatened species. Justin joined BirdLife South Africa in November 2023 as the Vulture Project Manager within the Species Conservation Program. He holds a BSc in Conservation Ecology from Stellenbosch University and has gained extensive experience in conservation through various roles across the country. His background in reserve management, land stewardship, and the wildlife industry, combined with his proficiency in firearm handling and reloading, makes him exceptionally well suited to this position. Justin currently leads the Vulture Project with a strong focus on promoting the use of lead-free ammunition in hunting, culling, and game management, or game practices. So very excited to welcome Justin to the webinar. I'll stop sharing, and then Justin, it is over to you. And just to let everybody know, we are experiencing a bit of Eskom power issues. So if we do lose Justin on along the way, please just bear with us as we hope to get him back on the webinar. Thanks, Justin.
Thanks very much, Jess, for that introduction. And once again, good evening, everybody. On this very chilly evening, I hope that you're warm. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to just walk you through a very photographic sort of highlights reel from my last conservation conversation in September last year, just to show you some highlights from the Vulture project and some of the key areas that we're involved with. So starting off is one of our primary focus areas, and that's on the Dronfield Nature Reserve, where there's been a white-backed vulture monitoring project taking place for over 30 years. And it's a really remarkable long-term study that draws a specialized and passionate group of individuals and volunteers from across the globe who assist in studying the cohorts of white-backed vulture chicks on this particular property, which is in the Northern Cape province of South Africa. And as you can see, the field work entails sending a brave or rather foolish soul up into the canopy of these majestic Vachelia areoloba trees, or commonly known as the camel thorn. And as you can see from the image, I'm the climber on this particular incident, and as you can see, you can't make me out on top of that canopy, but you enter an entirely new ecosystem in which these fascinating and highly or critically endangered birds choose to nest in. And once you ascend up into these trees, you can see clearly why the choice has been made by vultures to choose these trees, because they are incredibly thorny and gnarled and twisted and densely, the foliage is very dense. So it makes for a suitable nesting tree. And if any of you know anything about ties, these formidable thorns have embedded themselves quite firmly in these 17-inch BFG Goodrich tires, just to show you how strong they are. So the monitoring project has been running concurrently for 32 years, and it samples the entire cohort of chicks that hatch on the reserve. And wing tags are fitted to birds of suitable size, and saffrings as well are added, and that helps with identification of birds if they're ever recovered. And the wing tags are used for resightings data to help with understanding population trends in the region, and to look at nest fidelity, site fidelity, or not birds return to the same sites to breed year after year. This is just an example of the wing tags and the saffrings that are used. The bright yellow coloration helps with identification by observers, and we encourage anybody in the public who does come across any vultures with a wing tag to please send their sightings to us, and it just helps with our monitoring efforts. Then from the Vulture project, what we've taken it a step further, and we developed a long-term monitoring project to build on the studies by Dr. Linda van der Heever to understand the impacts of lead poisoning on white-backed vultures. And so in order to do that, we collect blood samples, and then we fit tracking devices to selected individuals. So this piece of equipment you can see in the right-hand picture is a lead K2 field analyzer, and a very, very small sample of blood is taken from the tarsal vein of the white-backed vulture, and it is put into this machine, and then it gives you a reading, which gives you the blood lead level and provides indication of what this particular bird's blood lead level is, or not it's a suitable candidate for a tracking device to be fitted. On the left-hand side are the tracking devices that we chose. This is from last year, 2024, in October. And we chose satellite devices as they provide increased accuracy in remote areas. So, as you can see, this is a table of the blood lead levels, along with some other details about the birds. And in red were the 6 individuals that were selected. And it's a combination of both wing length, weight, and blood lead level. And on the left-hand picture, that's our little mobile lab where we conducted blood lead samples. Once we had selected an individual, we fitted the tracking device, and this was done with some really expert input from colleagues from Natal, and done with the most great care. The 6 tracking devices are then used to study post-fledging movement behavior in the selected birds. And importantly, we selected birds with high blood lead levels to increase the sample size of birds that have been impacted by lead poisoning. 5 of the devices were satellite devices, and as I said, this are used to improve accuracy in remote areas. As from our studies, we find that these birds, when they fledge, they can fly as far as Angola, and so tracking their movement in very remote parts of Namibia and northern Zambia and southern Angola make it quite difficult. And then overall, it increases the sample size of tracked birds in the region, which is becoming an increasingly important thing to have. So as you can see here, I'm just bringing you back to this table. This is the selection criteria of individuals with high blood lead levels. And you can see, shockingly, the highest individual that was chosen was just under 100 micrograms per deciliter. But you chose birds with wing lengths over 410 mils, and with the weight, and it also required a bit of experience knowing if the bird was healthy enough to accept the tracking device, usually with a weight above 4 kilograms. So our first tracked bird that we fitted a unit to, this is an image of its movement data from when the bird was fitted with the tracking device in October last year until today. And it's traveled a total distance of just under 10,000 kilometers. I've just got the details there when we fitted the bird, when it was still a juvenile, with the wing length and the weight and the blood lead level. And you can see there's a concentration around the Kimberley area where the bird was fitted and where it fledged from. And then it's recently moved northwards to just south of Kariba Dam, and it's currently hanging out near Bulawayo. The second bird that we fitted a device to has traveled considerably more kilometers, just over 18,500 kilometers. And this bird, if any of you can make out the geographical features of this map, will be familiar with where that bird moved to a few weeks ago, and that's the Kruger National Park. And we're watching this bird as it was taking place during these terrible poisonings that have recently occurred there. And thankfully, this bird has flown westwards and is now in southern Botswana. And interestingly enough, this is the first time that birds tracked from this region have moved to the eastern part of the country. So it's all new and novel studies that we are being made aware of through this vital information from these tracking studies. Third individual is also a male, and this male followed a more direct line northwards, once again heading straight up after sort of exploring West Tutu, moved northwards, and is now currently between the Okavango Delta and Kariba Dam, with a total distance traveled of just over 10,000 kilometers. A fourth individual, and this had the highest blood lead level, and you'll notice that it's traveled considerably less than some of the other individuals, a high a high density of occupation in its natal range around Kimberley, and then it decided to move off just exploring Botswana. Then unfortunately, this was our first fatality, and this was a female, and she fledged in February, And until then, she had remained in the Kimberley region. She fledged and flew southwards a few hundred kilometers and then began her movement northwards, visiting southern Botswana and Namibia, and unfortunately was found deceased right on the border of the Kalahari Transfrontier National Park on the Botswana side. Luckily, colleagues in that region rescued and retrieved tracking device and could confirm that the individual had indeed passed away. There was no collisions from energy infrastructure, so we would assume with this very high blood lead level that that might be a reason for this fatality, keeping in mind that raptors do have high mortality rate in their first year. And our last and sixth bird that we fitted a tracking device, well, you'll notice the high density of tracking points around the Kimberley region in red. And this bird didn't travel very far at all and unfortunately succumbed to a collision with a power line in December this year, and moved a very, very short distance of only just over 3,000 kilometers. So based on our results from the October monitoring project on Dronfield Nature Reserve, we realized that we needed to expand our project. And we realized that in order to address this issue of lead poisoning, we needed to find out where the adults were provisioning food from during the breeding season. So we amended our project scope and applied to have tracking devices fitted to adult white-backed vultures to locate and understand their movements during the breeding season, which has previously not been studied in the region, and to find out exactly any and all of the supplementary feeding sites where they visit. And then we could implement on the ground interventions and speak to the landowners to try and mitigate their exposure to lead poisoning from fragments from lead core bullets. So earnestly, we began preparing for this new project by acquiring the most important part of the project, being the tracking devices. And we thankfully had them modified by a very generous assistance from Craig Natras, who printed some housing for us. We earnestly made our preparations early in the light of the early winter. In May, we started this study, preparing the baits and our traps. And we had our mobile lab ready on the back of our vehicle, and we had our capture boxes ready. And we were under the impression that all that was left was to wait quietly from the safety of the vulture hide for the vultures to come down and feed on the carcass that we had provided them. Little did we know that that wasn't exactly the case, but we did spend 3 days patiently waiting for them. And some of our colleagues decided that this was a good time to take up some light reading of a crime thriller. But with field work, unfortunately, not everything always goes to plan. And I've just used this image of a vulture. It was not from that feeding site, but it was not far away. And this was what we observed. They viewed our offerings from afar, didn't take much notice. Unfortunately, this can happen with field work, and lessons were learned that we need to adapt and modify and relearn about what the sort of feeding preferences of white-backed vultures in the region are. And we hope to return in a few months' time to continue with this white-backed vulture adult study, and so that we can continue to gain insights into where these birds are provisioning food from for their chicks during the breeding season in an attempt to reduce lead exposure from lead core ammunition. On a more successful note, I installed camera traps on Dronfield Nature Reserve, also at the start of the breeding season. And this is to look at a study that was done 10 years ago by Johnson and Mern, where they studied the incidence of egg and chick predation by pied crows. Being a critically endangered species, we felt that it would be valuable to relook at the change in this trend over the 10-year period. So camera traps were installed at nests, in this crucial breeding ground to study the incidence of egg and chick predation. And we're also going to use footage, as we're going to see a bit later on, to share insights from this little known or little shared bird that often has a bad reputation. So we hope that the footage that we collect from our cameras can help to improve public perception of this really incredible species that is highly threatened and needs all of the support that we can give it. And if some of you will remember from last year, we started a little series called The Bold and the Beautiful, which was documenting the footage from an area close by. And we will continue with our media campaign to show insights into these fascinating birds. So, in terms of finding the correct tree in which to set up a camera is no easy task. You need to look out for a couple of cues and signs. So firstly, seeing individuals on top of a tree is always a good start, but not necessarily a giveaway, as often vultures will move from tree to tree and not necessarily be an indication that they'll nest in that particular tree. Another clear a more reliable indication is fresh bedding material. So the picture on the right is a fresh piece of grass that has been collected, and it's actually fallen from the tree above, but it was still quite green. And then you could easily sort of confirm that bedding material had been brought up to this particular nest, and some of it had fallen down. And this, along with the whitewash that you can see on all the twigs beneath, is a good indication that this would be a suitable nesting tree. Another important criteria and factor to determine is cell phone signal. Being in a remote area, cell phone signal in South Africa can be a little bit difficult. But the cameras that we have chosen are remote cameras that use a SIM card, and they require cell phone signal. And we've chosen these cameras because we didn't want to disturb the birds during the breeding season, and therefore we didn't want to have to go beneath the tree to take out the memory cards to download the data. We can access these cameras remotely, and we can share this footage with you in almost real time. So those are the main things to look out for. We then also chose various sites on the reserve to give to get a better coverage and a more random picture of threats facing these birds. So before the camera can go up, a little bit of pruning is required. And being a protected tree species, this Vachelia areoloba, or the camel thorn, you are looking to remove as little material as possible. So the image on the left is how it started, and the image on the right is how I just cleared a little opening in which I could bring my camera trap up into, and that worked quite well. And the other important factor is that the nest, and most of the time the birds do this, but the nest needs to be in the southern part of the tree with a suitable branch in the northern side of the tree so that you can place the camera facing south, and your solar panel, as this is a solar powered camera, can face northwards. And then once it's all finished and done, this is one of the last trees that I installed my camera traps in. We're ready to record. And as you can see, this is quite a suitable camera trap. You can almost not make it out. I painted the poles and all of the equipment so that it blends in. And you can just make out the nest about 2/3 of the way up, just right of center. And this year, we've installed 5 cameras at 5 different nests. And we are just thrilled about it and hope we're going to catch some really interesting footage. They are in different locations, and different birds have selected them. And as you can see, birds have already made their nests and selected them. Some of them have even started breeding. And I'm just going to share with you some videos from these cameras. So this is one of our This is the second camera. As you can see, 2 adults arrive, and you would think that they're the natal pair. But not quite. The third mature individual interrupted them, and so who are the natal pair, we're not quite sure, but clearly, based on that footage, competition for nesting sites is fierce. This is another excellent footage. This was the nest that we studied last year. And there are four additional vultures who landed on the nest a few days ago, and a quite vicious squabble broke out between all the individuals. And this just also seems to, as breeding had not begun by the dominant pair, that suitable nesting sites are well sought after. Although one indication you could make out is that the four birds on the outside all seem to be juveniles, and that might have an impact on this behavior that we're observing. And this happens to be one of the most exciting clips that we've captured. So this is a nighttime visitor and a predator that was once thought of that may potentially predate on white-backed vultures. And to capture this, simply incredible. So I'll let you watch this, and as I'm sure all of you will know exactly what this is. And looking quite guilty. I'm sure you can all agree, and that is a Rose eagle owl. So quite an amazing sighting to see. This nest, nest 5, breeding had not begun, and this was captured just a few nights ago. And it's exactly the data that we're looking for. We're trying to understand who are the nest predators. Is it only crows, or is that merely just our lack of understanding, or are there other species that predate? And is this simply just natural, in part, what we should be seeing in areas like this? But nevertheless, this falls sort of on the edge of the distribution of a rose eagle owl, and nevertheless, a lovely sighting to see. And then finally, the start of the new generation just happened a few days ago. Successful laying of an egg from a white-backed vulture. And this happens to be a nest of the pair that we filmed last year at Bold and Beautiful. We have yet to determine if the pair is the same. We'll analyze the footage as best we can to determine if it is the same pair. As one of our study objectives was to find and determine site fidelity, which is a little it's a little known and not very well studied component of white-backed vulture biology in this region. And it's important to know if areas are suitable for them for breeding, do they return and do they use the same nest sites? This is just a wonderful bit of footage to see that we have a successful attempt at laying. Obviously, incubation is going to follow and then hatching, but this is the start of it. Right, and some of the other work that the Vulture Project has been involved with, and this is more under the lead project. Recently, we, along with collaborating with other conservation agencies, hosted the Battle of the Bullets. And it was a brilliant event, and it was hosted at Pongola Game Reserve at the beginning of April, and it included conservation agencies, including BirdLife South Africa, Wildlife Act, the Endangered Wildlife Trust, KZN Izimvelo Wildlife, and the KZN Vulture Project. And we gave presentations on lead toxicity in vultures, shifting to lead-free ammunition, and the regional vulture conservation efforts by the local partner. And then we did practical demonstrations on the shooting range, where we showed differences in performance between lead-free and lead-core ammunition. The day was very wet and muddy, but nevertheless, a strong crowd of about 45 individuals arrived, which was a really turnout. And this included conservation managers from local reserves. They were owners from hunting farms and people from the hunting community. The local gun shop, Pongola Gun Shop, were present. There were people who are involved with game ranching. There were raptor rehabilitation representatives, and just some general public, along with all of the conservation agencies. And the practical demonstrations were carried out by myself and a very knowledgeable ballistician, Van Bezuidenhout, who assisted with the big bore demonstrations. It was a very informative and well thought out demonstration, and we wanted to show three categories, mainly small, medium, and large calibers. And so the first demonstration I demonstrated was in small calibers, and I had 6 ballistic gels lined up, and I fired into them with a small caliber rifle, typically used for culling and game management purposes. And I used 2 lead-free bullets in the first 2 ballistic gels, followed by a variety of 4 different lead core bullets. And these covered from a standard soft bullet to a bonded bullet to a metal jacked, mastered by tip bullets. And this was to give a broad spread of any of the conventional lead core bullets that people may be using. And the intention is to show the wound profile in the ballistic gel between these different bullets. Shots were taken at close to 100 meters, which should be sort of standard distances. And the lead-free options performed exceptionally well, which was a really positive result. And as you can see on that left-hand, or both pictures, in fact, I'm just explaining to the audience what it is that we're looking at, showing the wound profile comparison between the different bullet types and how suitable the lead-free options are in this application. Some of them performed better than their lead core counterparts. We followed this up with the medium caliber demonstration, and I've left this picture quite large because it's an excellent illustration of what we're trying to avoid. And if you can make out within the gel, there are some other little pieces in there, and those are lead fragments. And that is what we consider lead deposition in the target. And these are the exact fragments that lead to lead poisoning in our scavenging guild, especially our vulture population. And that's what we're trying to move away from. So this was a rather large 5-liter gel block that was cast. It was fired into with just a standard medium caliber rifle, a .308 Winchester. And it was using a premium lead core bullet. And there were 4 of these, and I've just highlighted this one because it shows the lead deposition quite nicely, but we placed them all next to each other so the wound profile could be compared. And this is the sort of awareness that we're trying to raise in the sort of aspects of ballistics that we're trying to demonstrate to the audience. And this showed it very, very nicely. And lastly, we came down to the large caliber demonstration. This was relevant to the area as there's not only in game reserves where large calibers are required for trails guides and the like and reserve management, but there is also significant hunting in the area where large calibers are required. And this was another excellent demonstration showing the evolution of bullet shape and design and its impact on the terminal ballistics in ballistic gel. And those 4 gel blocks there were really very, very similar. Well, they improved with the design and improvement in nose shape in these big bore bullets, but they were also a wonderful demonstration to people to get a glimpse into something that you don't normally see. And this ballistic gel just does an excellent job at showing you that. And on the right there was just a bit of the setup. There was a ballistic gel placed in front of boxes where we could then collect the bullets. They were filled with fiber, which then allowed us to capture the bullets, show that there was no deformation, show straight line penetration, and present them on top of the blocks for comparison purposes. This was then followed by presentations to the audience. In the bottom left, we have Yelani van Wyk, who gave a really interesting presentation about tax incentives to landowners. We discussed topics about setting up vulture safe zones, and if there could be any way that the lead-free ammunition, if there could be any assistance with covering the costs of lead-free ammunition, which is all really relevant to the landowners and to the audience present. Dr. Lynn van Heerfer gave a presentation on her studies in lead toxicity in white-backed vultures. And Nell from Wildlife Act gave her presentation on their work in the region. Brent Coverdale chaired the meeting, and I gave a presentation on shifting to lead-free ammunition. And we also had Werner Bezuidenhout, who was really the key speaker, who spoke about his research, which is on a PhD in big bore ballistics. And he brought a really strong scientific backing to our work. And it was a really successful day. We had some great responses. We had commitment from some really important role players in the area to shifting to lead-free ammunition, and it was a great success. And we hope to continue with our partners, with the other conservation agencies, to continue to spread these events across the country in relevant areas, particularly in areas where vultures breed or where vultures are threatened, and to continue to engage with the hunting, shooting, and game management committee, or communities rather. My own personal capacity, some of the testing I've been doing. In the top row there, I've been looking at the expansion of South African produced copper monolithic bullets, looking at, do they expand reliably? Do they retain their mass as advertised? What level of expansion do they attain? And what effect does velocity have on these details? Some of them perform better than others. And it's all part of our research into shifting to lead-free ammunition, so that when we have these engagements, such as we did at Battle of the Bullets, we can speak with authority on this subject, and that we have performing our own testing of what's available. At the bottom is just a selection of brass hollow point bullets that are typically used in game management activities in small calibers, and just demonstrating how they lose mass and how they fragment and break apart and how the shank remains. But just some indications of sort of work I've been doing. Then we're going to speak a little bit about Vulture Safe Zones, which also forms a core component of the Vulture project. And they're an incredibly important conservation tool that takes place on the ground to create areas where threats to vultures found in that region are reduced. We work normally with private landowners, although this is expanding to government or national and provincial reserves. And the idea is to reduce the threats, to report on vulture activity in the region, and to ensure that places for particularly critically endangered or highly threatened species are made available for them to breed in. So I've just highlighted a few places where we work. Tswalu Kalahari Reserve was the first declared vulture safe zone in South Africa by BirdLife South Africa. And we visited there in early October last year. And we were thrilled to find that white-backed vultures were breeding on the reserve. And this is a wonderful success, because it shows that the regional population has moved south from the Van Zelsrus area. And then two areas where we would like to expand is in Kimberley, in Dronfield Nature Reserve and the surrounding farms, and in the Waterberg, where we already have the Lapalala Vulture Safe Zone, but we would like to expand also to neighboring reserves. So on Tswalu Kalahari, in that picture, it's a little bit difficult to make out, but on that ridge line were silver cluster leaf trees, and it was a very limited vegetation type on the reserve, but the white-backed vultures had selected this as a suitable nesting site, and there were 5 nests there. You can see them. It's a little bit difficult. It might be a little bit difficult to make them out. And due to its remoteness, it's difficult to have studied and monitored these nests, but some of the birds that seem to fly and juveniles have been noted in the region, so we can consider that there was some successful breeding, which is a wonderful result for this vulture safe zone. It just goes to show the value of this work in setting up these areas, engaging and working with landowners, and providing safe and suitable habitats for these species. We also did an assessment of the reserve just to check on things like water reservoirs, that they were mitigated with ramps so that when birds bathe after feeding, there is a means for them to escape. And this is as an example of that being a ramp that birds can move along. And then lastly, I just want to mention the recently released Regional Red Data book of 2025 that has been compiled by my colleagues at BirdLife South Africa. which is a wonderful resource that's open to the public, which I encourage you all to have a look at. And I've just put it up on the white-backed vulture, which is our focus species. And because my manager, Dr. Linda van der Heeff, was one of the contributors to this update, and it was rewarding work, and not to become complacent, although we do have stable populations in some parts, particularly around the Kimberley region where we work, due to these recent terrible vulture poisonings in the Kruger National Park and in Mpumalanga. It's all the more reason to continue our conservation efforts for this critically endangered species. But do take a look at the website. It's a wonderful resource, um, and it compiles all of the data on these species. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Justin, for that incredible overview. I think everybody is commending you on the efforts that you and Linda undertake to really help conserve this critically endangered species. So we have some great questions before I bombard you with mine. So naturally, there are quite a few on lead levels. I think the first one that we should go with is, what's the lethal threshold? You know, you had your table where you highlighted the highest thresholds or the highest levels for those that you've tested. What is the lethal threshold that you guys work with? Is there even one?
So there are categories that have been defined, starting with background exposure, and that's less than a micrograms per deciliter. And once you go above that, it becomes either subclinical or clinical or lethal. Um, and Dr. Linda van der Heeff's research in a PhD, she showed that for white-backed vultures, above 52.2 micrograms per deciliter becomes a critical threshold, at which an enzyme required in the synthesis of heme, which is the enzyme used to move or to produce hemoglobin, which moves oxygen around the body. Once you exceed that threshold, then it becomes very, very serious. Um, but birds obviously can, from any lead level, but it does become serious above 52 micrograms.
Great. And then on that, and just thank you everybody for your questions. And this was posed by Rob. Thanks, Rob. Of those that you guys have tested, and this does go back to, I guess, Linda's study, have you looked at the proportion of white-backed vultures indicating high levels of lead poisoning? You know, do you have a percentage?
Yes, yes, we do, Jess. So, what I didn't mention from and why we amended our scope of our research to include adults is that there was an increase in 7% of the proportion of chicks on Dronfield Nature Reserve between 2023 and 2024 with above background exposure, so that being the 10 micrograms per deciliter. And 6% of the cohort samples, that was 15 individuals, were above the critical threshold of 52 micrograms per deciliter. So just to recap, there was a 7% increase in birds above background exposure.
Wow. And that, I mean, although that is concerning, I think it has resulted in a really exciting expansion of the project, really understanding where is the source actually coming from. And it will be able to allow you to know who to target in this lead-free ammunition movement. Still staying on the lead levels,
Yes, exactly.
you know, other than chicks not fledging as far as what other chicks that don't have as high lead levels, what are the other symptoms of lead poisoning?
Well, typically in vultures, lead poisoning creates anemia, so that's reduced physiological activity. And recently, engaging with the rehabilitation center, they would say the birds are very lethargic. Um, and that's the immediate tell that they have high blood lead levels. They can also suffer neurological effects, and this might include their ability to navigate aerial obstacles whilst they're learning to fly. So in those early ages, those first 3 months when they fledge, which are the most critical to their survival, when they develop their flight muscles and they develop sort of spatial awareness and the ability to navigate, lead poisoning can greatly affect their ability, as this has been found documented in other animals, most typically humans. And so one of our birds did collide with the power line within that 3 month period. It was actually within its first month of fledging. And so this could be attributed to that high blood lead level.
Great. Thanks for that, Justin. I was actually going to ask, I mean, is that an example of the impact of high lead levels? So the questions are just flooding in. So I think we might as well just touch on, you mentioned the mass poisoning that happened not only in Kruger, but in other protected areas. What is BirdLife's involvement in, mitigating these kinds of events?
Yeah, that's a great question. So really the people on the ground, the Endangered Wildlife Trust and all Rehabilitation must really be commended on their efforts. They were the first responders and the people to deal with this. So at BirdLife South Africa, we're not typically involved with that on the ground work. And so we have provided support from where we can. We've engaged directly with the Minister of Environmental Affairs, Minister George, and have written to him and engaged or to highlight the matter and to ask for support and to create a sense of urgency around the recovery in response to this poisoning incident. And we have offered support to the conservation organizations on the ground from our side. So that's really what we can do and continue to raise awareness and share from our media platforms on what is happening and what can be done.
Okay. It's great that, BirdLife South Africa is taking the policy route to help support, like you said, the other NGOs that are working on the ground. Based on the success of the Battle of the Bullets event, and congratulations to you and the partners who made that happen. I'm assuming it's going to be an annual event, just because of the need to increase, lead-free ammunition. What's the biggest challenge that you are facing in, encouraging alternatives to lead ammunition?
So yeah, we definitely want to continue hosting these Battle of Bullets events. They are becoming more and more well attended as we progress. The demonstrations are becoming more convincing and with more scientific rigor. And a lot of the people sometimes can't make it when we host the event. So to host them again in the same area can also be of value. So that's one of the events that we'll continue to do. But direct engagements with end users is still by far the most valuable. The direct approach is the most valuable way to convince the people who are going to use the ammunition to change. And so these practical demonstrations I think, are one of the best ways to go. The community appreciates the tangible results of what they can see, apart from just a presentation. Although the presentations are important to provide context, being able to see and hear, smell the gunpowder, all of those things go a long way in helping to convince them. And we've seen that from these events. So that's going to be the approach, these direct engagements with communities, particularly in areas where we have breeding or there are notable areas where vultures occur.
Great. Thanks, Justin. And I guess it only takes really one champion or somebody in the industry to understand the value of the work and to know that, there isn't much of a difference between lead-free and alternative ammunition options to really get other stakeholders on board on that initiative. I guess one of my questions would be, just um, you were saying to influence public perception or just to get everybody excited about vultures. I think a few years ago, everybody just saw them as these dirty birds eating rotting meat, and it's almost the opposite in the ecosystem. What's the most surprising thing that you noticed when you really got so close to the vultures during your trapping events? Because it's not something that everybody experiences. So it would just be nice to hear, these special moments in the field.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question, Jess. So I've been privileged to some great sort of wildlife moments and sightings with these birds. But on the topic of their cleanliness, it's quite, and I wasn't aware of this until I started, but it's a really interesting habit of theirs. But they prefer to bathe after feeding in the cleanest water source available in whichever tea or reserve they find themselves on. So they love um, livestock cribs or troughs that farmers put out for their livestock or game. They love to make use of those as opposed to a natural pan or a water hole that has been made for game or livestock. So they really do prefer the clean water. Um, and then one of the other really great instances when I've been putting up these camera traps or when we are doing the monitoring project, and when you ascend to the top of these camel thorn trees and you look up to the sky, then you often see vultures soaring above you. You always get the idea that they're, having an eye on what you're doing and checking out what it is that you're up to, and that they're very observant of, and they may have taken off when you've approached, but they're keeping an eye on you. So, there's some really interesting and fascinating moments. And then obviously handling and the chicks, they can be quite feisty. You've got to be very careful. You've got to be work really well. But and what you'll see from the camera footage is they can be really, yeah, quite feisty, quite territorial in their engages with each other. And then lastly, another point I wanted to add is I think it should become for everybody a sought after wildlife sighting, black vulture feeding on a carcass, because it's really just such an exciting viewing. It's a melee of birds in the dust, and they are all fighting and squawking. It's really something that people should have on their bucket lists to see a big flock of white-backed vultures coming down. And just as our landscape is losing some iconic species, most notably things like rhino, well, after the poisonings, we're going to lose these iconic species like white-backed vultures. And these wonderful wildlightings of them congregating on a carcass might become a thing of the past. And so it really should become a wildlife bucket list item to see. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that um, anecdotal story. And yeah, just I think with everything that is happening in our national parks or even private protected areas, those moments really should be treasured because it's becoming more rare. I think a question has come through from Chad, and I think it's good just to cover for those who aren't necessarily aware how vultures are actually being exposed to the lead. So he's assuming that hunted animals are retrieved by hunters. So how are vultures actually being exposed to the lead?
Yeah, sure. That's a good question. In most instances, carcasses are retrieved from the veldt. It's very rare that a hunter doesn't bag his carcass. It does happen, but I think it's a very rare incidence. So in most cases, um, vultures are becoming exposed to lead fragments from um, from the processing of venison on hunting and culling farms or sorry, culling operations, but predominantly from hunting farms. So wherever waste or the unwanted remains are placed, vultures become and they do what they're intended to do, which is to remove um, meat and carcasses from the landscape. But this is the instances where they become exposed to it. So typically on hunting farms, you'll have your skinning facilities, and the carcass will be cleaned, and any waste material, any blood meat will be removed from the carcass. And this typically might be left out or placed out to be consumed by scavengers, and this is the main place where vultures particularly are being exposed to lead fragments.
Yeah, and this, I guess it's unintentional poisoning because these industries aren't, they're discarding the meat knowing that, the vultures are going to benefit consuming the waste. Um, and they might not, or, now there's a lot more information about this lead poisoning. But originally it was just, well, vultures clean up the environment, might as well use that system to get rid of the waste. But now it's just, reaching out to those industries and highlighting, well, this behavior or this system isn't necessarily benefiting the vultures. Um, Maybe just
Absolutely.
a last question. And, we highlighted the excitement of expanding the tracking to adults and really identifying the sources where they are picking up all this lead. How many adults do you plan on tracking? Because unfortunately, losing individuals is just part of the study, and it's always terribly sad when that happens. So, what number are you aiming for?
Yeah, thank you, Jess. Yeah, so we're gonna fit tracking devices to 10 adult white-backed vultures. We hope that this will be a significant enough number to locate locations where they're provisioning food from. We Mortality rates are a little bit lower in adult birds, and so we think this is an acceptable sample size for this research question.
Okay. Um, so Ted van der Meulen has now still on the topic of lead levels, and you highlighted that it's a lot of the time it's venison, and that's something that humans consume. So are we looking at the impact that these lead levels will eventually have on our health as well? Is that an element to the study?
Yes, yeah. So it's not a primary focus of my project, but it is our manager, Dr. Van der Heefe, and she is looking at this. And it's something that occurs across the globe with a lot of research going into venison that's provisioned for communities with elevated lead levels being determined or being discovered in these samples that are being tested. And we have been conducting testing ourselves of venison, and we are finding elevated lead samples that we have studied.
Okay, so it's essentially watch the space. I'm assuming it's a bit of a long-term study trying to identify
Apps,
all the samples to test,
yeah,
and it's definitely something we'll keep everybody updated on, whether to avoid venison
yeah,
or not.
absolutely. Yeah, so I don't want to give too much away, but it certainly is a concern, and it's something that we're going to include in our awareness campaigns, is that it isn't only affecting the scavenging guild, but it's also affecting consumers, which is us,
Yeah.
ourselves. And so, we should do our best to provide the best sort of venison product that we want to for our family and for those who are consuming it. And this is a known toxin that we should, do our best to remove from the system.
Okay, I'm gonna limit it to two more questions. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to get to them all. But we'll find a way. There have been some relevant questions about, where can they find the studies that we refer to, and we'll figure out a way how to share that with everybody on the webinar. So, second last question, just on the lead-free ammunition, are they more expensive than the alternatives? Is that a current challenge? And how do you foresee overcoming that?
Okay. Yeah. So it's yeah. So lead-free ammunition is, in some instances, more expensive, but in most instances, only more expensive than premium lead core ammunition. It is quite similar in price to not to sort of lower quality lead core ammunition. But you need to look at it. You can't really just simplify it like that because you need to look at it as in relation to the total of your hunt or your shooting exercises. And these differences might be as small as 5%, 10% difference in price. And so if that's for a round or a box of rounds, that might be a difference of 1 to 2 or 3 rand. But if you look at that as the total of your hunt, which might be anywhere between 15 to 30,000 rand, an extra few hundred rand on ammunition is an insignificant value. So if you are an occasional hunter, it shouldn't really matter much. If you uh, um, are somebody who shoots a lot, there are other alternatives. Brass typically is cheapest of all the options. And there are many manufacturers producing brass bullets that are more than suitable for target applications and certainly for culling applications in some instances. And they have very similar price points. And there is companies that do produce lead-free rounds, which is very important because not everybody is a hand loader. There's 2 companies currently doing it in South Africa. They are trying to keep their prices comparable with what's available on the shelves. And so there really isn't, it really isn't a major issue unless you are harvesting thousands and thousands of animals per annum.
And I guess this is
And
demand
even
driven.
still,
Oh,
the important Well, I just wanted to say this is the environmental cost that we need to take upon ourselves. And that's the main point about the price of it. Price, as long as it's reasonable and is can be, we can afford it, it's that we must take upon this environmental cost and not let the environment or things like vultures take that.
yeah. Very good point. And I was just going to say, I'm assuming it's demand driven as well. So the more industry shift towards an alternative, the cheaper the the products will become, essentially in an ideal world.
Abs- That's what we expect. It should be driven by the market. I know most of the lead manufacturers, and a lot of them are having the capacity to increase their supply, anticipating an increase in demand from the market. And so hopefully, yes, price parity and lower input costs would result in a lower product at the end of the day, lower product price. So yes, we would expect that.
Okay. And then just last question, everybody was just blown over by the presentations, compliments to you, and just the work that BirdLife South Africa in general is doing. As citizen scientists, I'm always trying to find ways to see how citizen scientists can get more involved in our conservation efforts. So, if you had an elevator pitch of like 1 minute, how would you encourage citizen science to get involved in these conservation efforts?
Okay, well, thanks for springing that on me. Well, I would say monitor white-backed vultures and record them on the various apps like BirdLife and BirdPro, um, and attend any of the events that are hosted, any of the Battle of the Bullets or any of these sorts of events. Participate in speaking to any friends or family who are maybe hunters or firearm owners. Explain to them that there are alternatives available, that lead is a toxic metal that we're trying to avoid and trying to remove from the environment, and just to take an active role in any of the projects that I've sort of gone over. Um, yeah, I think that's the best that citizen science can do.
That's great, Justin. Despite putting you on the spot, I think that's a great overview of how everybody can get involved. All right, everybody. We've unfortunately reached our time. It won't be the last time we host Justin on Conservation Conversations, so definitely keep an eye out for our schedule. We are excited to just see how the project evolves, where these birds are going, and we commend you on your work and look forward to learning more. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Jess. Thanks to everybody for tuning in.